Welcome to Fashion Forward, where we look at how fashion and society impact each other. I'm your host, Brittany Carl, so let's get started. The first time belts are mentioned in history is during the Bronze Age. This era lasted between 33,000 BC and 12,000 BC. During this time, belts were mostly ropes and cords that were used to tie tunics together at the waist. Ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and ancient Hebrew civilizations all used belts to show power, wealth, and status. Other ways that belts show power today would be in martial arts. But another way of showing status is in wrestling matches and boxing matches. The champion is usually crowned with a belt. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that women started to wear belts as well. If you were a noblewoman, it was often a chain belt that had a part leaning down. If you were a knight, you usually wore the same kind of belt. If you were in battle, you usually had a belt that came with a sheath or something else so that you could stick a sword or a knife into it. If you were a commoner, it was usually a very simple leather belt that you could just hang things off of. Women with questionable reputations were literally prohibited from wearing belts. Slaves were also unable to wear belts. Military officers often wore belts to denote rank or power or to intimidate foes. One belt that was used in war times was called the baldric. Now this one was different than most belts. It didn't go across the waist or hip, it actually went over the shoulder. This was usually used to carry a sword. During the Renaissance era, belts actually replaced bodices and corsets for women. This actually allowed women to move around more freely and to be more comfortable. During the 1800s, men's pants started to become higher waisted, and it was around this time that the suspenders were invented. And they were actually a lot more comfortable than belts with the higher waisted pants, so belts pretty much stopped being worn by men. Now, it wasn't until after World War I that men started to wear belts again. They had grown accustomed to wearing belts instead of suspenders while fighting in the war. During the 1930s, many women began to wear pants. This meant that more women were wearing belts. They were also wearing belts decoratively with their dresses. During the 1940s, World War II hit, and so belts started to become more standard and more simple. The 1950s brought in a lot of different fashions of belts, including the obi, which is a Japanese sash that is often worn with a kimono. Usually the belt buckle is a fashion statement. Men don't often have many accessories, but belts have always been something that men could use to express their own personal fashion taste. Utility belts have been around since ancient times and still are. You have painters, plumbers, and electricians still using them, and Batman. Over time, belts have mostly been used to show power, wealth, or status, or to be used for practical purposes, such as to carry a sword or weapon or other objects of need. But other times, belts are simply used for fashion. Fashion and society are always moving forward, so check out next week's episode, where I will look into the history of hats.